Nora didn't cry when her father dragged her to the edge of the road and shoved a satchel into her arms. She only stood there, stiff and silent, as he spit the words that would change everything. "Since you care so much for them, go live with one." The one he meant was Elijah, once a slave on their land, now a free man with calloused hands and a blacksmith's forge just outside the township. Word had already spread that Nora had been teaching letters to the children of freedmen, and in her father's eyes, that made her worse than a traitor. It made her useless. She had grown up in lace and sermons, with piano lessons and Sunday hats, but that morning she walked barefoot down a dirt path lined with jeers, every step carrying the weight of her father's disgust. When she reached the forge, Elijah was hammering iron, his back bare and soaked with sweat, the fire casting orange light across his dark skin. He looked up slowly, eyes narrowing when he saw her. "I didn't send for you," he said. "I know," she replied, voice steady. "But my father gave me to you, said it was fitting." Elijah flinched, not at her presence, but at the word gave. He wiped his brow, then gestured toward the small house behind the forge. "You'll find a room there. I won't stop you if you want to leave." But Nora didn't leave. She stood at the door that night, listening to the town whisper and hiss, calling her the slave's wife, though Elijah had never touched her. Inside, the room was plain: a cot, a cracked mirror, and a Bible without a cover. Nora laid her satchel down and sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling for the first time since morning. She had no wedding band, no papers, no vows, only the echo of her father's voice and the strange stillness of a home that expected nothing from her. That night, Elijah brought a bowl of stew and left it at her door. He didn't knock. She opened it to find the bowl warm and covered with a cloth, steam rising like mercy. As she ate in silence, Nora realized the cruelest man she'd ever known had sent her away like broken furniture. But the one they all feared had given her supper, and a door that closed from the inside. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't someone's daughter. She was just a woman with a name. And maybe someday, something more. The next morning, Nora woke before the rooster crowed, unfamiliar with the silence of a house that didn't demand her service. No cook shouting, no bells rung, just birds, and the steady clang of a hammer outside. She found Elijah already at work, arms flexing with every swing, sparks flying in bursts of red and gold. He didn't look at her when she stepped into the yard. "If you're staying, you'll need to earn your place," he said without pause. "Ain't charity here." Nora didn't flinch. "Show me how." He hesitated, then pointed to a pile of metal scraps. "Sort these. By weight, not size." And so she did, all morning under the sun, hands blistering from work she'd never known, her skirts blackened at the hem. Elijah never offered praise, only glanced sideways now and then with something unreadable in his gaze. At midday, a boy came running, thin, barefoot, maybe 8, calling, "Mr. Elijah, the wheel rim's split again." Elijah grabbed his tools, nodded for Nora to follow. She did, breathless. They reached a broken-down wagon, where a young black mother stood wringing her hands beside a mule. Elijah knelt and began the repair, while Nora offered the woman a sip from her flask and a square of bread from her apron. The woman stared. "You ain't afraid to sit with me?" Nora met her eyes. "Afraid of what?" The woman smiled faintly. "Of what folks'll say? White girl riding with him?" Nora answered without thinking. "Let them talk." They talk anyway. When the job was done, Elijah gave the boy a carved wooden bird from his pocket. Rough but beautiful. Nora watched him closely after that. Not a man of many words, but one who left kindness like footprints. That evening, as they returned to the forge, Elijah finally spoke. You don't belong here, he said. Nora looked at him, her voice calm. I don't belong anywhere. He didn't argue, just handed her a cloth for her hands, nodding at the blisters. You'll want salve for those. She took it, surprised. You have some? No, he said, but I'll make some. And for a man who never offered softness in words, the gesture said more than a poem. That night, Nora sat on the steps of the forge, listening to the wind. And when Elijah passed by to lock up, she asked quietly, Will they ever stop hating me? He paused, then said, No. But hate can't live where love makes a home. She didn't know it yet, but those words would come back to her when the world tried to burn what they built. The forge smelled of smoke, iron, and something new. Trust, perhaps. Nora had stayed 3 days now, and though Elijah still said little, his silence had changed. Less cold. More careful. She swept the forge in the mornings before he rose, and by the 3rd morning, he left out extra bread without a word. At breakfast, he finally asked, What's your real name? She hesitated. Nora. No, he said, eyes on the fire. The name you had before they stripped it from you, the one that means you. Her chest tightened. I don't know that name anymore. Elijah didn't press. Instead, he showed her how to hold tongs steady, how to tell when the metal sang hot enough for shaping. Her arms trembled, but she didn't stop. Good, he murmured once. Just that. But it felt like an anthem. That afternoon, a neighbor came, a white man with a twitchy smile and a gun slung carelessly on his hip. Heard you've got a visitor, Elijah. Pretty one. Elijah didn't flinch. She's working, the man snorted. That what we're calling it now? His eyes slid to Nora. You trade your chains for his bed? Nora stepped forward, not blinking. I'm here by choice. That's what they all say, until they're carrying half-blood babies. Elijah didn't move, didn't raise his voice. He only said, Get off my land. Or what? Elijah took one slow step closer. You won't hear the second warning. The man spat on the dirt and rode off, laughing. But when he was gone, Nora's hands shook. They'll never leave me alone? Elijah stared at her, jaw clenched. They'll come, but you're not alone now. That night, he carved her name into a piece of cedar and set it above the forge's door. Not girl, not guest. Nora. Just Nora. Why? She asked, fingers brushing the wood. He said, Because they erased you, and I won't let them. For the first time since her father's cruelty, her name felt like it belonged to her, and to a place where she might, just might, be safe. The 4th night brought thunder and something far worse. Nora was stacking kindling behind the forge when a shadow stepped from the trees. Her blood went cold. She recognized the stance before the face, her father, Reverend Calloway, dressed in traveling black and holding a Bible like a blade. You've shamed me, he said, paraded your disgrace in a black man's home. Elijah stepped out beside her, hammer still in hand. You're trespassing. The Reverend ignored him. She's my daughter. Elijah's voice dropped. She's not yours. Not anymore. Nora trembled, but didn't step back. You gave me away like livestock, she said. You sold me for silence. You lost your right to speak to me like I'm yours. The Reverend's face twisted. You were meant to suffer. That was the price of defiance. Yet here you are, glowing. His eyes landed on her bare feet, the soot on her hands, the necklace Elijah had given her, a single twisted nail strung on leather. You belong in shame. Elijah moved first, not violent, just a single step forward that made the Reverend recoil. You've got no right to speak of belonging. This is sin, the Reverend snapped. "This is damnation." Nora stepped between them, voice soft but unyielding. "Number, this is survival. This is someone seeing me and not looking away." Rain began to fall. Light at first, then faster. The Reverend's Bible grew damp, pages curling like they couldn't hold the words anymore. "If you stay here," he warned, "you'll burn with him." "Then let the fire come," Nora whispered, "because this time I won't run." The Reverend turned without another word, rain soaking his coat. Elijah didn't speak. He simply reached out and took Nora's hand, dirty, trembling, but real. They watched the old man disappear into the trees, the storm swallowing him whole. And under the leaking awning of the forge, Nora finally wept. Not from fear, but from the weight of standing her ground. Elijah didn't try to comfort her with words. He simply stayed beside her until the tears passed and the thunder moved on. Because some nights weren't for fighting. Some were just for staying. By morning, word had spread. The Reverend's horse had been seen limping away from Elijah's forge, and though no one admitted to speaking with him, every eye in town seemed sharper, colder. The baker no longer waved. The grocer set down Nora's change without a word. At the well, a woman Nora had once taught to read turned her back and whispered just loud enough for Nora to hear, "Lying with a slave and calling it love, she's cursed." Nora didn't flinch. But that evening, she brought the hammer down on the anvil with more force than needed, sparks flying like rage made visible. Elijah said nothing. He'd seen the stairs, too. "You don't have to stay here," he told her as he hung up his apron. "We can leave. Go west. Start where no one knows your name." Nora shook her head. "If I leave, it says they're right." Elijah stepped closer, searching her face. "Then what do you need?" She paused, hands trembling. "I need to be seen, not as a warning, as a woman who chose her own life." That night, they walked hand in hand to the town church, the same one where her father had preached hatred into the pews for a decade. The doors were locked, but they didn't come to pray. Nora climbed the front steps, lit a lantern, and set it by the wooden cross carved into the frame. Then she laid a single iron nail at the threshold. It wasn't rebellion. It was remembrance. A symbol of everything she'd forged with her own hands. Behind her, Elijah placed his hand on her shoulder. No words, just presence. By morning, the nail was gone, but the message remained. People still whispered. They still turned away, but a few eyes softened. A child waved. And one woman, silent, plain, always watching, left a basket of fruit by their forge without a note. Elijah smiled when he saw it. "They won't all come back," he said. Nora nodded. "I don't need them to. I just need one truth to stay louder than their silence." And when they went back inside, Nora hung her apron like armor and stoked the fire. Because if the world wouldn't make room for their love, she would forge one with her own 2 hands. The first signs were too subtle for Nora to trust. A wave of dizziness at the anvil, the smell of hot iron making her stomach churn. She chalked it up to fatigue, to the weight of carrying a life in defiance of a town that wished her gone. But when the queasiness became routine, and her hands trembled while stitching Elijah's torn shirt one evening, she paused. She didn't tell him at first. She told the chickens, whispering her suspicions to their clucks and feathers. She counted weeks, remembered that stolen summer after the auction when she and Elijah had become something beyond survival, something tender and true. That night, she waited until he finished bathing, steam rising from the wash basin as he toweled off his arms. "I need to show you something," she said, guiding his hand gently over her belly. "It's early still, but I think—" Her voice faltered. Elijah's eyes widened, then softened into something she'd never seen on his face before. Fear and joy, reverence and disbelief. "A child?" he whispered. "Our child." Nora nodded. "I know what it means in this town, but I won't hide it." Elijah dropped to his knees, pressing his forehead gently to her stomach. "Then we won't hide together." Days passed, and her body changed. Her back ached, her appetite shifted. She kept working, but Elijah insisted on carrying the heavy metal. "You carry life now," he said. "Let me carry the weight." The townspeople noticed, of course, whispered faster than wildfire. The widow, pregnant by a slave she'd married in secret, the reverend's daughter, bearing the fruit of sin. But Nora didn't flinch. She stood at the forge with her hands blackened and her belly swelling, and when people came for horseshoes or wagon rims, she met their gaze without apology. One afternoon, a boy came by, barefoot, thin, skittish. He'd been Elijah's neighbor once, before the town burned his shack down. He stared at Nora's belly, then asked, "Is the baby going to be born black or white?" Elijah crouched beside him. "He'll be born whole. That's what matters." The boy nodded like he wasn't sure what that meant, but he stayed to help sweep the dust. That night, Nora sat by the fire with her feet up, Elijah rubbing her ankles. "Are you scared?" he asked. She leaned her head back, eyes closed. "Yes, but not of being a mother. I'm scared of raising someone strong in a world that punishes strength." Elijah kissed her forehead. "Then we'll raise them louder than the world." And Nora believed him, because everything they'd built so far had been impossible. And yet here they were, carving out a future the world never gave them permission to dream. Nora had avoided her father's Bible for months. It sat untouched on the highest shelf in the barn, wrapped in linen and tied with a faded black ribbon, the same ribbon her mother had used to mark the page where he stopped preaching. She didn't want to touch it, not because of faith, but because of what it represented. Judgment, betrayal, the memory of being handed over like livestock. But one morning, while Elijah was in town and the baby fluttered inside her like wings on water, Nora found herself drawn to it. She brought it down with careful hands, unwrapping the fabric, feeling the familiar weight of the leather binding. The edges were brittle with age. She didn't expect to find anything new, but as she flipped to the middle, a folded piece of paper slid out, yellowed, creased, fragile. It was addressed, "For my daughter, if she ever forgives me." Her hands trembled. She unfolded the letter slowly, her breath catching in her throat. "Nora, I know what I did can't be washed clean, but I need you to understand I wasn't punishing you. I was punishing myself. I saw in you everything I failed to protect in your mother. You were too strong, too proud, too much like the woman I loved and couldn't save. I gave you to that man because I thought he'd crush you down to something the world would accept. Instead, you rose, and you found someone who saw you like she did. I see it now. And if you ever read this, know I did love you. I just never knew how to love someone who wouldn't bend." She finished reading, eyes brimming. The letter crumpled in her lap, but the weight of it sank somewhere deeper than anger. She didn't forgive him. Not yet. But she understood him in a way she hadn't before. When Elijah returned from town, dusty and quiet, she met him at the door and handed him the letter. He read it in silence, then folded it back without comment. "Does it change anything?" he asked. Nora shook her head. "Not what I am, not who we are." But that night, before bed, she lit a single candle in the window. Not for her father, not for peace, but for the child growing inside her. A child who would carry both fire and mercy. And maybe that was the truest kind of inheritance, one that broke the cycle by living differently. As Elijah rested beside her, Hand on her stomach, she whispered, "We'll raise them in truth. Even the hard kind." He kissed her shoulder. "Then they'll never have to find love the way we did, by surviving it first." It was near dusk when Elijah first noticed the footprints. Small, scattered near the edge of the river where he'd gone to fetch water, still humming low to himself, a habit from before when silence meant danger. But something in the air shifted. The prints were too fresh to ignore and too small to belong to any man. He followed them upstream, careful and slow, until he saw a figure crouched behind a reed cluster. A girl, no older than 10, hair tangled, dress torn, holding a burlap-wrapped bundle. She looked up when he stepped into view, her eyes sharp but not afraid. "You the man who lives up there?" she asked, nodding toward the bluff. Elijah nodded, cautious. "You been following us?" She didn't flinch. "Not you, her." His chest tightened. "Nora?" The girl didn't answer, just pulled the bundle closer and stepped forward. "My name's Ruth. My mama died near the old tracks last winter. Before she passed, she said if anything happened, I should find the girl with the scar on her shoulder, the one the preacher tried to break." Elijah's blood went cold. Only one man had described Nora that way. "You knew her father?" The girl nodded. "He gave Mama silver once. Told her to keep quiet, but Mama said he owed more than silence." She reached into the bundle and pulled out a faded cloth photograph, torn at the corners, but unmistakable. Nora, maybe 16, standing beside another girl with the same sharp eyes. "That's her," Ruth whispered. "That's my sister." By the time Elijah brought Ruth back to the cabin, Nora was at the stove, flour up to her elbows, kneading dough. She turned at the sound of the door, hands wiping clean, and her eyes locked onto the girl. Her gaze dropped to the photo, then back to Ruth, and she froze. Ruth stepped forward, her voice barely audible. "Mama said your name like it was a hymn. I didn't know if you'd remember." Nora moved like something ancient had snapped loose inside her. She dropped to her knees and wrapped the girl in her arms. No sobs, no shaking. Just stillness. Later that night, as Ruth slept curled in a blanket on the cot, Elijah sat beside Nora and whispered, "You didn't know?" She shook her head. "He said she died as a baby. I believed him. I believed everything." But now she didn't have to believe anymore. The truth had walked right up to her, fierce and unafraid, and offered her something the past never could. A beginning that wasn't stolen, but chose. Words spread like dry grass catching flame, first in whispers at the general store, then in louder gasps on the church steps. "The slave boy took her in," they said. "Now he's harboring another." The townsfolk, already sour with the memory of Nora's defiance, found new reasons to hate what they didn't understand. One by one, they gathered outside Elijah's cabin, not with torches but with laws in hand. Papers, rules, excuses wrapped in civility. Sheriff Boyd, paunch heavy and pride heavier, stood at the front with a clipboard and a cold expression. "It's not about race," he lied. "It's about codes. 2 girls living alone with a man. Well, that ain't decent." Nora stood in the doorway, Ruth behind her, arms crossed. "We're not alone," she said. "We're a family." Boyd scoffed. "Not by law, you ain't." Elijah stepped forward then, his face calm, but voice steady as stone. "And what law says a man can't protect who he loves?" The sheriff's jaw twitched. "This town ain't got patience for charity cases and broken girls pretending they belong." Behind him, one of the younger deputies shifted, uneasy. "Sir," he muttered, "maybe this ain't—" "Quiet," Boyd snapped. "I'm giving them until tomorrow. After that, this land's no longer theirs." He turned and walked off, the crowd shuffling behind him like cattle unsure of the stampede. That night, Elijah didn't eat. Neither did Nora. Ruth tried to stay brave but cried into her blanket. When the silence got too thick, Elijah finally spoke. "I've been running from fires all my life, some in the field, some in men's hearts, but I ain't running now." Nora turned, startled. "You'd stay even if it meant losing everything?" He nodded slowly. "You are everything." She crossed the room and took his hand. It was the first time she'd touched him like that, openly, fearlessly. And he didn't pull away. The next morning, as smoke curled up from the Carver Ranch chimney, a different kind of fire caught wind. Because Nora walked into town with Ruth at her side and Elijah just behind, holding the deed papers high. Not just for the cabin, but for the land. Legal, signed, and sealed by the very man who'd once enslaved Elijah. "He owed me more than freedom," Elijah said. "He owed me a future, and I've made one." The townsfolk stood stunned. Sheriff Boyd took one look at the paper and spat on the ground. "You still won't belong." But Nora smiled, arm around Ruth. "We don't need to belong to you." And with that, they turned their backs to the crowd and walked home. They didn't burn down Elijah's cabin. They didn't tear down Nora's resolve. And they didn't take Ruth away. Not because they changed, but because the law had changed first. Weeks passed, then months, and what was once a shack at the edge of nowhere became something else entirely. A schoolroom on Wednesdays, a kitchen for the hungry on Sundays, and a porch that never stayed quiet past supper. Nora planted herbs near the windows, Ruth kept bees, and Elijah carved shelves into every wall until books outnumbered bricks. Townsfolk still passed by slow, but the sneers faded over time, replaced by puzzled nods and then cautious greetings. One woman, the same who once refused to sell cloth to Nora, arrived with her daughter in tow. "She don't read good," the woman mumbled, "but I heard you teach." Nora didn't reply, just opened the door and set out an extra chair. The girl stayed all afternoon. More followed. By spring, they called her Miss Nora, but Ruth, now taller, steadier, called her something else. "Mama," she said one morning out of nowhere while helping hang laundry. The word hung in the air. Nora turned, clothespin frozen mid-motion. "What did you say?" Ruth blushed but didn't back down. "I mean it. I know you didn't birth me, but no one's ever stayed. No one's ever made me feel wanted." Nora knelt in the dirt, eyes glistening. "You don't have to call me that." Ruth smiled. "I want to." And so she did, from that day on. As for Elijah, he never did ask Nora to marry him. He didn't have to. One quiet night, as they sat by the fire and the girl slept nearby, he simply took her hand, kissed the back of it, and said, "I've been yours since the first time you asked me if I was cold." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "And I've been yours since you handed me bread without asking for anything back." They didn't speak of forever. They didn't need to. Their home had no sign, no steeple, no fence, but it became the place people walked to when they had nowhere else to go. And Nora, once discarded, once punished, stood in the doorway each evening and watched her family grow, not by blood, but by kindness, not by name, but by choice. And when someone asked what she was, widow, servant, rebel, teacher, she only smiled and answered, "I'm hers, and his, and my own." Because love, when it's chosen through fire, writes its own laws and carves new names into the world that no one can take away. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind. If you had seen the fire coming, would you have stood beside her too? Tell us in the comments.